Chase Thomas podcast. My nephew needs me to record. See, I already hate it. I hate it.
All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas podcast. From still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee, Everything School HQ. Joining me from RockyTopInsider.com, it's Ryan Schumpert. Ryan, good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. A little bit sleep deprived today, but rolling on and ready to talk about a disappointing performance from the Vols on Saturday night.
How was the cold? Recording in the cold, getting up there. What was it like as someone who made the trip?
Yeah, I mean it was very cold, and I'm a southern softy with the weather for sure. So like I don't really feel like I can complain about it. I sat in the press box for the entire game. There were about 30,000 Tennessee fans that were sitting out there in the elements dealing with it. Those are the people who I feel for. Those are the people that really had to battle the cold weather, but being down on the field for like 20 minutes before the game and 20 minutes post game, like it was cold and all, but it was doable. It wasn't anything just horrific.
What do you think the percentage actually was? The most realistic, honest percentage of Vol fans to Ohio State fans in the building. What do you think it was?
It's kind of hard to say because I was on the second row of the press box, which meant I couldn't really see a ton under me. And I do think that side was predominantly Ohio State people. I would say somewhere between 25 and 30% Tennessee. Closer to 30 is what I would say. But 25 if I'm being conservative.
Interesting. I mean, it was a great showing, and it was one of those where Matt and I in the earlier pod today was like one of the weirder things I saw, because Twitter was just a nightmare all weekend, and people just got to log off, folks. Like I'm a lurker. I'm not a poster. It's one of those where I'm like, this is not a way to spend your day and night. And there were some national folks and local folks just tweeting through it, not just Tennessee, but like the college football playoff as a whole.
Just the entire thing. Yeah.
Just the takes never stopped, and then arguing with strangers and on the internet, and like you're not going to change any minds here. The people who thought Alabama deserved to be in thought it 3 weeks ago. They're going to think it after. The people who thought SMU should have been, like, the people who thought Tennessee was fraudulent, they're still going to think they're fraudulent. Like, nobody's minds are getting changed on social media. Like, it's not something that I partake in, but I do read it, and I do lurk and keep up with stuff. I'm a don't get involved guy, Ryan Schumpert. Like, in the very Larry David-esque, I'm a don't get involved guy. But I am a monitor, like it's just like, hey, what's going on? That's crazy. Don't want to get involved, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to watch and see how this plays out. But to me, I'm just like the weirdest shot, I guess, from opposing fan base. So national folks are like Tennessee fans wasted their money, or Tennessee fans did all that and the team plays that way. I'm like, that's not what do you want? That they don't control what happens on the field. Like, what did you want them to do? Like, it's not a waste. Like, it's actually pretty amazing that you had 30,000 Tennessee fans make the trip in the cold outside. Some people packing up and just leaving that day. It's more of an embarrassment on Ohio State's fan base side of things that Tennessee was able to get that many people in the building and to have that much orange. But I don't know. Like, to me, I'm going full Vol fan defense, but like to try and dunk on Vol fans for like, oh, what? Look at that. You did all that and you still got boat race on a national stage. Like, the fans don't, they're not playing in this game. Like, it's not their fault. Like, it's a pretty great, amazing showing that it makes Tennessee unique in a way that I just don't think there are many fan bases that be able to pull off what Tennessee pulled off in the shoe on Saturday night.
100%. I mean, the only one I can remember somewhat similar was in 2017, I think, when Georgia went up and played at Notre Dame early in the season. There were just a ton of Georgia fans there. I mean, that's the only one thing I can remember. Kind of in the same boat. But yeah, I mean, it's a weird own on Tennessee fans. It's like, spend all that money to go up there, and it's like, well, it's a 5-hour drive. Columbus is a pretty big city. Hotels weren't that expensive. Tickets were $55 by the day of the game. Like,
and what do you think they would be here?
They weren't going to Ireland to watch the game or something. They were driving up Interstate 75 and 71.
I mean, this doesn't happen if this game's in Knoxville. There's no $55 ticket for Tennessee Ohio State on Saturday night. Like, it was an embarrassment what happened to Ohio State, and like the fans to be this disgusted with where their team was coming off the Michigan loss, and then they obviously pile drive Tennessee on the field. But I mean, just I don't know. I think that's just one of the weirder ones from this weekend of like, no, it's actually pretty awesome. Like, it was pretty amazing, and Tennessee fans really showed out in a positive way and showed like Heupel getting really hyped. You could tell it meant a lot to him, like getting off the bus and like going to see the fans and like dapping them up, and he was pumped. Like, there's only a handful of fan bases in college football who could do what Tennessee did this weekend, and it's a testament to the strength of them. I mean, also just going back to the baseball parade, like college baseball parade that Tennessee pulled off, like it's just, you're not going to see that really anywhere else. Like, that was preposterous for college baseball. So shout out to Rocky Top. I thought they did a great job, and don't let the folks get to you for going and having a fun time, because like, when's the next time Tennessee's going to play at the Shoe? Who knows? It might not be for a long time. It's only the second time. It's like, even if you lose, still a great memory, still a great time. You got to hang out and see a venue you haven't been to, go with some people who are special to you, all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know. I just think it's such a weird thing to be like, what a waste of time because the team lost. Like, well, someone's gonna lose in these games. That's just that's how this works. But we're gonna do, because this is our last pod here before a little brief holiday break here, Ryan Schumpert, and as two Larry David / Seinfeld / Curb guys, I thought it'd be fun to do a Festivus theme here, where we have a lot of grievances going into 2025 with this fall football team. And I think this would be fun to air our grievances here following Tennessee's shellacking in Columbus. So I give the ball to you first here, Ryan Schumpert. Your first grievance you would like to air here on this very chilly Sunday night in Knoxville, Tennessee.
I guess my first grievance would be the Tennessee, watching the University of Tennessee football passing offense feels far, far, far too similar to watching the Tennessee Titans passing offense. What's happened? I mean, what has happened with this passing game? I mean, it was bad all year. There was never a moment where it clicked. There were enough moments against mid to bottom level SEC teams where it was competent and good enough for Tennessee to win games with a good defense and a good running game. But it just never had the explosiveness, and it was dreadful in Tennessee's 3 losses. I think in those 3 games, Tennessee averaged 143 passing yards. They didn't throw for over 170 yards in one of those games. They had 2 passes of over 20 yards in the 3 games they lost this season. And we talked about this a good bit more specifically, I guess, with the receivers as a whole coming out of the Georgia game. But Tennessee's passing offense has just wildly, wildly fallen off from the first 2 years under Heupel to the last 2. And that has to get fixed for Tennessee going forward. If they're going to if they're just going to be back in the college football playoff, and certainly if they're going to make a little bit of noise next time they get there.
I think that's I don't know. Would you say that's your looming biggest question right now? Your biggest grievance is just the passing offense? Because I think for me, it probably is the passing offense. It's just weird. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just weird. The last 2 years, because it's different stuff. Like, it's not like they're trying to do the stuff that they were doing in 22 and 21. They've abandoned that, right? Like, that's part of one of the weirder things. It's like stacking receivers, like Jalen Hyatt being right behind. Like, there's things that they did in 22 and 21 that they don't do anymore. They, like, the way they use Velus Jones in 2021, they haven't really found anybody to utilize in that way. They haven't really, it just felt more dynamic. It felt more unique. And I think the best way to describe the Tennessee passing offense the last 2 years is just stale. Like, everything about this, especially the disparity between what Tennessee was able to do passing wise versus what Ohio State was able to do, is Ohio State, like, they're doing all this pre-snap motion, they're doing all this different stuff to get their blue chip receivers open, and a lot of eye candy to get Tennessee's linebackers lollygagging and safeties, that kind of thing, just to mess with their eyes and all that kind of stuff. But like you said, this has been it's not even just this year, it's 2 years straight of now, like, half of the Heupel era at Tennessee the vertical passing game's been bad. So it's not like Joe Milton got a lot of criticism last year, and I'm not saying Joe Milton was great last year, but this has been a good year for Joe Milton's vindication in terms of like, hey, there were real problems last year with this passing game, and it wasn't just Joe Milton. Like Joe Milton struggled, but Nico struggled, and you hope that year 2 for Nico and year 3 in the scheme will be better because Nico was, I mean, one of the things that's easy to overlook is like the guys who dominated the SEC offensively were all upperclassmen, whether that was Jackson Dart, Jalen Milrow, Lenore Sellers is a third-year player. You have Carson Beck, obviously, upperclassmen. You just go up and down the list of the Garrett Nussmeier. The guys who had good years are all upperclassmen. Will Howard, obviously, upperclassman, transfer, Ohio State. Like Dylan Gabriel, 5th year. Like this is not a young man's game in terms of quarterback. I think it's becoming more and more rare for young quarterbacks to thrive and break through on the scene. So I think that is something that's forgotten by some folks with Nico. I thought Nico showed all kinds of heart in this game. I was very impressed with Nico, especially running the football and what he was able to do as just a warrior for Tennessee when guys weren't open and his offensive line was failing him. It's like you being an NFL guy and bringing up the Titans, the way I would describe what's happened the last 2 years, more so this year because you have a young quarterback, is what was the reason that you brought in Will Levis, right? Like the Titans, this backfired, but they traded for DeAndre Hopkins. They loaded up on offense because they were like, all right, if we have a 2nd-round pick, the only way we're going to figure out what he is by stacking the roster around him with expensive guys, some playmakers, some running backs, this, that, and the other, offensive line, and then give him as many pieces as possible to flourish and see what happens. That's what the Chiefs did early on with Tyreek Hill. And then Patrick Mahomes got comfortable where they're like, he doesn't need Tyreek Hill anymore to still be an MVP level player because he's had years of getting comfortable and becoming an MVP like player. Brady didn't need Moss later in his career. Like guys early on, you need to surround them with as good of a situation as possible to set them up for long-term success. And I think the passing game and the options and the skill guys and the offensive line around Nico this year was the worst it's been in the 4 years under Heupel. I think the skill guys really, really let Nico down and let this offense down. Like I think there's no way around it. It's just that like part of why it's so hard to figure out where Nico is in his development is last night the offensive line, like the tackles were terrible. The wide receivers were not good. Dylan Sampson wasn't available. So what did you really glean from Nico? What's he supposed to do? So anyone who like has any like negative, I don't know how you can critique Nico other than dude's a warrior, made the best of a bad situation. And I don't know where this passing game is in 2025 because we now have 2 straight years of, man, there's something off. There's just something off with this passing game.
For sure, undoubtedly. And look, I think it goes back to what my exact concern I said all offseason was, I think I was more questionable of the receivers than most were over the offseason. And my big thing was like, I don't know if Nico is going to be good enough to carry a unit or carry the passing game and drag guys along if the receiver play isn't great. I think I said the Tennessee's receiving core needs to be good, and if they're good and they're open and they're making plays, I think Nico will have a good season. And there were points in the year early in SEC play when Nico was missing some guys that were open, and he certainly didn't play perfect. Not only he played perfect yesterday, I think he was a little hesitant throwing the football. I think there were a couple times he had guys open and he needed to let it rip, but that was certainly not the majority of pass plays. And he, certainly he got some happy feet at times and was worried about the pass rush, but how would you not be as a young player when the offensive line was failing him the way it did again last night against Ohio State, the way it did against Georgia, the way it did against Oklahoma, the way it did against most of the good defenses Tennessee played this season. So certainly you would expect Nico to get better going from year 1 to year 2. I think he will. But I still think that question I just said will remain a question this offseason. Will Nico be so good that he can carry a passing attack that has a lot of question marks around him? Maybe he makes that big of a jump. I don't think that's impossible, but I certainly don't think you can bank on it. And to me, there's very little reason to think Tennessee's offensive line is going to be any better next season. which leaves the receiver spot to where they got to get a whole lot better. And we do, and I think I said this back at some point in the season, but we do a lot of ripping of Tennessee's high school recruiting and development at the offensive line. The fact that they're a year 4 and they haven't developed a true recruited a high school player and developed him as a starter. You say the same thing about the receivers. It's not quite that dramatic. The floor has been higher.
Tight end too.
But yeah, tight end too. To me, that's a little bit different because I feel like they just kind of skimped on the tight end spot when they were down numbers with scholarships.
I mean, Ethan Davis is just it doesn't look like. We'll see this offseason. I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, especially now with the possibility of Kitselman coming back. But look,
Right.
A receiver or tight end, I just don't really care about that much. Sue me. Like, it's just not that big a part of this offense in the passing game. The receivers, I mean, we're just seeing it. Caleb Webb was a 4-star. He's in the portal. Nathan Laycock was a top 150 kid. He never played a meaningful snap here. Chaz Nimrod was a guy that was fringe rotation. He's gone. I mean, Squirrel White's the only one. And, I may be willing to give him a little bit of a pass because he was just so injured, it felt like, all year, and he did at least have one good season. But certainly he's not a star and a real difference maker in Tennessee's offense. So the receiver spot, again, they're 4 years into this thing, and they haven't recruited and developed any sort of stud or really high-level SEC player in Heupel's tenure.
It's a mass exodus. You and I were texting about this today. I mean, there's a possibility. I mean, it's like 3 receivers back from this group next year. It's an overhaul. Like, you're bringing in 3 guys, and Dodson, Jackson, and Smith. And Smith, I'm pretty excited about. And I think he has a better chance of being a right away contributor than the 2 receivers in Staley and Matthews from this past year. His frame and what Tennessee needs more on the outside. Like, I think Travis Smith has a path to meaningful snaps for Tennessee next year. I'm excited about him and Rodarius. I think Dodson's more of a long-term kind of guy, but like, we talk about like this has got to get better in 25, but you're kind of behind the 8 ball in terms of the portal and adding somebody, because like now you have to really figure out. I mean, Brazel had a rough night on Saturday. It did not go well at all for Brazel this year in year 1 in this scheme. Is he back next year? Is Squirrel back for year 4 in the slot? Like, what do you do in that regard? Like, you're losing Dante, who's been your best receiver all year long. And part of the issue last night, too, was Dante played 25 snaps, Squirrel played 16, and you had a bunch of guys in the portal. Like, you were down. Braylon Staley, who has redshirted and played nothing all year long, played 51 snaps for you in a playoff game against Ohio State. Like, that's just a big spot for him to be thrown into. And I mean, he handled it well. And I still am optimistic and hopeful when it comes to Braylon and Mike, but next year is so huge for this offense, that in this passing game in particular, that I think this is going to be a really, really fascinating offseason, next couple weeks in particular, because Tennessee's got to be active. Like, I just don't know how they can't go big in the portal at least one spot at receiver. Like, I think they probably hoped that somebody would break through and they wouldn't have to do this going into year 5 in the Heupel era, but I don't think you have a choice. I think you have to go after somebody. Like, that guy might not be in the portal now, who knows, but I don't think it would be wise to go into 25 and just be like, we're betting on our in-house guys and Mike and Braylon, and then our freshmen, Brazel, and maybe Squirrel, or like one of the 2, or maybe it's both. But does that make you think that does that make you think that this passing game is going to be that much improved in 25 if that's what you're doing? Like, I just think you kind of have to go big. Because look at what George is doing, right? George has had a terrible year with injury luck, and their transfers didn't work out with Ra and Colby Young, right? They are going out. Like, they're bringing in Zachariah Branch, and we'll see if they land him, but they're bringing it like all these different guys on campus, Dane Key, Jay Sturdivant, all these different dudes, while also signing 5 receivers out of their recruiting class. Like, it's just, they saw an issue this year with their receivers, and they're like, we're bringing in blue chippers, but we're also going to go in the portal. Like, iron sharpens iron. We got to stock this as much as we possibly can for a potentially young quarterback in Gunnar Stockton taking over next year. You got to go big for Nico. Like, Nico needs weapons, and I think you can be excited about the guys who are coming in this cycle and be excited about Mike and Braylon and still be like, you need more production. Like, to your point, you need some guaranteed production out wide next year. You cannot have this many question marks going into 25.
Yeah, I mean, that's an airing of grievances. Why haven't they been more aggressive in the transfer portal at receiver to this point? It makes no sense to me, and that should have been readily obvious before last night. Last night was nothing we haven't seen this season with the passing offense. Last night was no revelation. They knew all those guys were gone into portal. They know at the very least they need a couple of bodies, and they should know that they need difference makers. So I'm completely with you. Like, I think that would be a massive red flag if Tennessee's just trying to run it back,
or just get like a guy who is okay at the group of 5 level just for depth. Like, you can't go into this, cannot be a depth portal signing with Tennessee. You have to go in and look for a starter on the outside. Like,
I think two. Yeah, it needs to be one guy that is a big money spender, is going to be one of the most expensive players on your roster that's a difference maker, and then you need to go get a depth piece of somebody that can come in and at least play 20 snaps a game or be a serviceable third receiver if one of your starters gets hurt.
I just don't think there's any way around it. And then you talk about the offensive line, the tackle stuff. I mean, Campbell and Davis had a rough night. I think Campbell was the lowest graded player on PFF. He and Davis had a tough time at right tackle, but I mean, Campbell was only able to go like 25 snaps. Like, he's been banged up all year long, so it's hard to say like how much of it is just Campbell and how much of it is just the guy's been banged up all year. But Dane Davis was in that spot, and it was rough for him last night. But I think Hurd, he got better. I didn't think Hurd had a bad night. I think Hurd was okay, and I still would probably lean towards Hurd being okay to good next year with year 2 in the scheme and just the amount of talent he has. Like, I think Hurd will be okay, but it's a lot of pressure on David Sanders, like true freshman starting right tackle. All right, man, like you gotta go. Like, the offensive line was a problem all year long, and then you're replacing all 3 guys potentially in the interior. We'll see what happens with Carrick, but he had kind of an okay game. He had some rough moments last night. We haven't seen the snaps without Cooper Mays in the Heupel era have not gone well. We don't know what that world looks like, and that is going to be a very different situation. I like Satterwhite a lot. We'll see if it's Satterwhite. Do they go in the portal? I don't know, but you bring in William Moy from Arizona. We'll see. That should probably be a nice plug and play from Spraggins to him or Carrick to him. Like, that'll probably be okay. But this is a big offseason for Ellerby's guys. Like, you need some Ellerby dudes to play and be effective for Tennessee next year. There's no more hiding, and there's no more Pruitt guys. Like, that's the other part of it. All the Pruitt guys are gone. This is now a fully Heupel team going into 2025. And I think on the offensive line and receiver, those two in particular, it's just, there's a lot of pressure in those 2 rooms. And they've just got it. If you want to build off this year and really compete and get back to the CFP, because you're going to have to win in an upset. Like, you're either going to have to beat Georgia at home or win at one of the 2 places you haven't won at in decades, in Tuscaloosa or Gainesville, to make the CFP. And I think the only way to have a realistic chance of doing that is the passing game's got to get better and the offensive line's got to be a lot better.
Yeah, I just don't. The offensive line, I don't think the offensive line's going to be a lot better. That's just, to me, that's not a reality. It's
just hard for me to forecast yet. We don't really know. I don't know. I lean towards you being right there, but I still want to see how it completely unfolds. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see what the final look is going into spring ball.
Yeah, and that's fair. And that's not to say that it's just going to be awful.
Yeah,
I just think it's going to look similar to it did this year, where most games they're solid and they're not great, and you'll be able to run the ball because the system makes it easy to run the ball, and the pass protection is not going to be terrible. And then when they play the really good teams with a bunch of elite pass rushers, the pass protection is probably going to be pretty bad.
But I think there's a path where Hurd and Sanders are really good in 20.
I'm not sure there is. Really,
I think
good.
There's a path. I don't know. I think there's. It wouldn't surprise me if pass pro with those 2 is solid. Next year, it wouldn't surprise me. I think it will be better. I think they'll be better than this year.
A little bit better than this year. Solid to me. There is a path to that. Yeah, really good. I don't think there's a path to.
Yeah.
but solid, a little bit better than this year. Like, yeah, that's plausible. But it's not going to be anything The offensive line's not going to radically be better. That's not where Tennessee's going to make a jump in the passing game, with the offensive line being a lot better, in my opinion. Obviously, we're 9 months or 8.5 months away from kickoff. Maybe some things change, but I have a hard time seeing that.
Can I earn a grievance here?
Air grievance, yeah.
I said all year, this is just a lot of Dylan Sampson. This is like the machine is built through Dylan Sampson. And I said the Kerryon Johnson comparison to Auburn in 2017, where he carries Auburn to they were one of the best teams in college football that year. He beats Alabama, beats Georgia, and he's not 100% right in the SEC title game against Georgia in the rematch, and they lose. Tennessee, part of the reason that they've been successful and hard to stop, and one of the things that should be helpful about Tennessee's wide splits, and you wrote about this, Ryan, is the wide splits and the light boxes are always going to be beneficial and advantageous for Tennessee's running backs. I understand that Dylan Sampson, especially his second half heroics, like Dylan Sampson had a great season for Tennessee this year. But the thing that worried me all season long was, like, I'm looking at these snap counts and like how he passed Jalen Wright for his full season midway through the season. I'm like, that's a lot. You're putting a lot on your running back. And when you're building the plane out of one guy and he's a running back and you're playing for the CFP, it could get ugly in a hurry if he gets banged up or if he's not ready, because that's been your guy. Like, suddenly you don't have your MVP on offense and you're like, what are we going to do? And you saw last night, it got ugly with Dylan Sampson not available. And Dylan Sampson, especially in the second half, because Dylan Sampson has been such a good second half player for Tennessee. Like, that would have been nice to have him ready to go in the second half when you cut the lead to 11 going into halftime. But he wasn't available. And I'm like, Dylan Sampson's been a warrior for Tennessee all year long. He's had a great season. This is not a Dylan Sampson problem. This was a Tennessee offensive philosophy problem this year of just like, I understand Dylan got you there, but like Peyton Lewis was fine. Deshaun Bishop was banged up, but like when Cam Seldon was healthier, get him back in the like that rotation that Tennessee has had for the last couple of years. I think going away from that, I understand some of it was you kind of had to, but a grievance I had all year long was like, it just worried me when we get to December. Dylan's got a lot of tread on the tires. Like Dylan, where he got banged up was at the end of the Vanderbilt game that you already had won. So it was just, my grievance is like, there was too much Dylan Sampson that I didn't think that was conducive to long-term success this year. And it's not a Dylan Sampson problem. He did what he was supposed to do, but that I worried how this was going to end, and it did not end well there.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think we texted about it. We're joking that it's, all our arguments about it over the course of the season. It's funny that he got hurt in like the 15 to 20 offensive snaps the entire season that Tennessee had clinched the college football playoff berth. Because that was my whole thing. It's like, it's just this offense is not good enough. And I do think that's what I would say. And I almost really like the Kerryon Johnson comparison in this way too. And that Auburn team was better. But at the same time, that Auburn team, to me, it feels like that Auburn team got everything out of what they were. They were not an elite team. They were really good.
That's what Tennessee kind of did with Dylan.
And that's exactly what Tennessee did this year, where I think like you almost have to lean on those guys. Like Tennessee, more than anything, like they capitalized on a pretty weak SEC. They won 10 games. They made the playoff without having a great team. And I think that's, a testament to coaching and finding ways to be successful when they weren't at their best in what you expect them to be under Josh Heupel. And I think they kind of had to squeeze Dylan Sampson the way they did in a lot of ways to get that. And I think at the same time, because you point out, this team, it's just, Sampson was worn too thin by December. Even with Sampson, I just don't, obviously last night's game wasn't going to change with Dylan Sampson, but just generally speaking, even if Tennessee's draw was different, I just don't know if this Tennessee team was ever good enough to make a deep run either way. So I think that's fair. It is an extremely fair grievance when you talk about when he got hurt on what I think was the last drive of the Vanderbilt game. You easily could have had someone else out there. He did not need to be on the field for it. But just the general philosophy, like Tennessee, everything was hard for them offensively this year, and milking Sampson and running him as much as they did, while it maybe lowered their ceiling in the long run, I just think their floor wasn't high enough that they could afford to maybe not afford? Afford's probably not the right word, but I'm not going to blame them for just riding the hot hand through the entire season on an offense that not much worked to roll with what did work and make sure they could go 10-2 because of that.
That's fair. What's your next grievance, Ryan Schumpert?
Okay, my next grievance is a smaller thing. This feels like a true Frank Costanza grievance. I'm no football genius. I'm no incredible football mind. They're not paying me to coach football, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are saying I'm not a ball knower. Sam Smith's saying I'm not a ball knower. And I'm not even disagreeing with that vehemently. But one thing I do love is some good old-fashioned mesh. It's a beautiful pass concept. It's phenomenal. It is bread and butter on a 3rd and short, 3rd and intermediate, beats man, beats zone. What a concept. Tennessee has not run it since Jimmy Callaway dropped that pass on 4th and 3 in Gainesville in 2021. And they get torched on it constantly. They just get torched and torched and torched on mesh. They did last night. They did a lot this season. And that's my grievance. It's not even that I'm saying they have to run it or anything, but it's just a bread and butter, simple passing concept. And when everything seems so difficult for Tennessee's passing offense all season, it's something I would have liked to see more. And look, I get it's kind of hard with the wide splits. That's not really conducive to running a lot of mesh and running a lot of short crossers over the field. But as a man that loves me some mesh, the way Tennessee does not run it in the way that other teams, and especially Ohio State last night, had a bunch of success running it against Tennessee, it's a grievance.
Ryan, here's what I ask of you this week. I need you to write this is my favorite Galaxy Brain Vols column this week. This is your homework assignment. Drop what you're doing. Sorry, Rick. This takes lead priority. I need you to write, it's time to bring Dave Clawson back. It's time to bring the Clawson offense back. Part 2.
Slow mesh.
He retired. Give him an offensive analyst job. His entire role, Wake Forest isn't that far, North Carolina. His entire role is to help Heupel get the mesh, not the full part of the playbook, just like set like a 10% of the playbook, just to get. He's an analyst. He's familiar with Tennessee. Dave Clawson, bring him back for 10% of the Tennessee offense.
I love it. I don't think I'll be writing it, but I love the idea. I'm with you on it.
I like that one. I mean, it's just, you know what I would just take? More versatility. Where, like, sometimes, like, last year, I mean, it's funny whenever the option pops out because you're like, what is that? Like, remember last year with Alabama where Joe Milton was suddenly doing option reads and, like, he's pitching on the end and you're like, whoa, what's happening here? That's what it felt like last night, the option to Peyton Lewis on the outside on 3rd down. You're like, what is happening? Well, that's not something we've run all year long, and that seems like
they've run it a couple times. Not
with
much.
Peyton Lewis?
Well, not with Peyton Lewis.
That's what I'm saying. Like, it was a bold move on the outside with the true freshman over there. But I don't know. They need something else where you got to add. There has to be a new wrinkle. There has to be, and it goes back to what we've been texting about. Is I don't know how this works now with the rule changes with coaches and analysts and stuff, but you got to bring in other people. Like, it's just, you've got more brain drain, by the way. It's been kind of under the radar, but Jerry Mack has pulled multiple Tennessee assistants. Mitch Mettello, is that how you pronounce his last name? Is it Mettello? Or?
I think so.
But he's now the offensive coordinator with Jerry Mack, and he's been a long time guy. Mackenzie Melton came in as an analyst. He's now a QB coach at UCF. So you have more drain on that front in the offensive side of the ball. It's a young group. Kelsey Pope, extremely young. Alec Ablin, young. Joey Halsley, young. Glenn Ellerby's the only older coach on that side of the ball, really. So I think at the very least you have to infuse other minds into this offense. It doesn't mean you have to drastically change everything, but I just think they need some veterans in the room to kind of like, it's always gonna be Heupel's offense and everything else, but you need fresh eyes. Like you have 2 years of data now that it's just the offense, especially the passing game, needs some tweaks. And I don't know if you're going to get it from just running it back with this exact same group. Doesn't mean you have to fire people, because in this era you can bring in other coaches and stuff like that. I would look to bring in other minds. Is just look to bring in new faces who understand what you're doing, but also may have different ideas. Or you just give like, hey, how much is it going to cost to get Alex Golesh back from USF? Where it's like, are you really enjoying the yearly portal drain, or would you like to come back here for a couple years and get back into Tennessee football in a much easier life?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, and that's something that I was going to get to, or wanted to get to. Like, Josh Heupel needs to be very, what's the right word? I don't think it's radically, but very harshly analyzing his offense right now.
Yeah.
And
well, can we also say Golesh is not a Heupel disciple? Like he came from Iowa State. It's not like he's an air raid guy. It's not like he needs an Alex Golesh of like maybe not even Alex Golesh in particular, but just someone else who doesn't come from the tree. Do you know what I mean? Like it's all Heupel tree now.
Yeah. And look, like, and not that you're saying that they have to. Like, I know there's been a lot of people calling for Halsley's job and calling for staff changes, and I'm not saying any of that stuff would be bad, and it, but it's Heupel's offense.
Yeah.
Firing Joey Halsley does not do anything on its own.
What we could do is add a co-OC to help him. Add someone else. Yeah. Like, I'm looking to add people. Like, I would rather add.
Yes, and I'm all for that. I don't think that's a problem or anything, but it's more about adding just to add doesn't mean anything. You need to add because Heupel notices there's a problem and is trying to change things. And look, I wrote about this too. Here's an airing grievance. What the heck happened to the tempo? This offense runs with no tempo, and this is I could be way off on this, but my very amateur analysis of the passing offense struggling is your offense is based on you run a very, very, very simple route tree that's based on winning one-on-ones and putting defenses on their heels because of the tempo. That's kind of how part of the reason you get away with this simple route tree. Well, Tennessee runs with no tempos, and they don't have receivers that can win a one-on-ones. So it's like these simple route trees all of a sudden become incredibly easy to defend. Anybody that has a pulse this year, I watched them for 50 snaps a game have absolutely no fear at all that Brew McCoy is going to run past them. None. Sit on the slant. Sit on the short stuff. And when he runs 3 routes, fly, slant, curl, it becomes incredibly, incredibly simple to defend. And you either have to have really good receivers that can go out there and win one-on-ones to get away with some of this. Or to me, you got to be flexible and adapt some stuff and do some different things offensively. Or at the very least, run the tempo so you are putting defenses on their heels a little bit. So all that to say, like, that's a very much a rambling mesh of stuff, a burrito bowl of stuff right there. But you gotta just assess things incredibly honestly and be incredibly critical if you're Josh Heupel of your offense and your passing game, and admit that some things have to change either in what you're doing. To me, it feels like more diversity in what they run, and that would lend into your point about bringing people onto the staff with different perspective. But at the very least, if you're not going to do that, you got to get back to running tempo because Tennessee's passing game just seemed way too easy to defend all this season. Unless Tennessee's radically going to get a lot better at receiver, which I think they can get better at receiver with some portal entry or portal additions. But I don't think you're all of a sudden going to be 2019 LSU out there or something.
No, I think that's fair, and I just wonder who it is. Because, I mean, like, it's kind of interesting because the guys he lost are not Heupel guys, right? Like, Brian John Marie was not someone who's been with him forever, and he's now at Michigan. You look at Cody Burns in year 1. He's gone off to the NFL. There wasn't I don't think a long he wasn't a long time Heupel guy. And he's been promoting from within, which is fine. You can flex when you're succeeding, but you lost the guys who weren't like the Golesh was an outside the box type of guy, and he was a different kind of personality. And that's what I think is like when fans get latched on to Golesh, I understand it. I think more than anything, what I'm saying is like you just need different perspectives. Like you can't. I think in 25 you have to bring in people that push back on like, okay, y'all been doing this for 2 years. What if we did this? or here's what's worked for me at stop A, B, and C. Could we institute some of these concepts to the like? It's just I think more needs to be on the table, and I just don't think there's any way around not diversifying this offense in 25 because like half of the tenure now of the Heupel era, the passing game has not been good. So, I mean, this is a make or break year. You could, if it's not better next year, over half of Heupel's tenure has been rough in the passing game. So, I'm very curious what he does this offseason because he's such a high floor coach and he's won 70% of his games. Heupel's been good. But for him to go from good to great, these are the kind of tough decisions he has to make. And this is why you make millions of dollars, right? Like this kind of offseason is why you make millions of dollars to be a head coach of a school at like Tennessee. Is what did Ohio State have to do? The team you just got blitzed by after last season. Their offense was broken. It didn't work. And their offensive line had issues. So what did Ryan Day do? He went and hired Chip Kelly away from UCLA. And they could win a national title because of that hire and drastically changing their offense. He could have run it back with Kyle McCord and run it back with his guys. But Brian Hartline stayed on staff, but he's not calling plays anymore. Like that's the kind of stuff you have to be flexible to do. You know what I mean? Like Hartline is clearly a big part of what Ohio State's doing, especially on the recruiting trail. But there was still an issue. So you address it, and you're like, Chip Kelly is one of the best play callers in college football. We're bringing him in. I have a prior relationship. That's what I think you have to do with your Heupel. You have to make that tough call to bring in and to always look to get better. And you don't have to fire guys. So I think people look at firing. It's like, no, you need to bring in more. Like, I think there's been a lot of drain on that side of the ball, and I think they need to bring in new, fresh minds to help this young staff in a pivotal year in year 5.
I agree. I think that's all completely fair. I mean, the one thing that, again, I would just slowly push back on, not even your idea, just your example, is that you bring Chip Kelly in to run the offense. They're not going to bring anybody in to run the offense. It's going to be Josh Heupel's offense. But yes, I do agree that need to bring more minds in. And look, it needs to be, if not an overhaul in the passing attack, there needs to be serious changes. And look, like we say all these things, and it's obviously a more negative podcast, but outside of those 3 games you said last year that, I would put Tennessee as an underdog, or next year, I put Tennessee an underdog right now. Tennessee should not lose another game. Doesn't mean they won't. They've lost a game they shouldn't lose basically every year Heupel's been there. And in my opinion, I don't think the defense is going to take a big step back next year. So if you can find a way to fix the offense, you can easily win one of those games and be right back at 10-2 and maybe have a little more balance and be a little more equipped to make a run in the playoffs. So it's not all doom and gloom, but that is, to me, just the passing offense. There's just no getting around it, that it's a very serious problem right now, and it's keeping Tennessee from getting where they want to go.
Can I give you my final grievance?
Yes.
I've said all year the pass rush is not what people think it is. And no sacks versus Georgia and
Have you said
Ohio
that all
State.
year?
I've said that all year. Like, the rush defense is legit. I've said, like, the Ole Miss, I was on stage at the TPL event where I was like, the difference between Ole Miss and Tennessee is Ole Miss is like Walter Nolan and Princely and company. They get home. Like, you look at the sack totals, like, Ole Miss was getting home and hitting guys. Tennessee is solid. They have dudes. They rotate. The biggest strength about Tennessee's defensive line this year was their depth. Like, they could rotate 10 to 12 guys. Like, that's the best thing about Tennessee's defense, is that they're deep, and most defensive lines don't have this many blue chippers and just high upside guys. Like, and they're all very different. Like, Bryson Easton's skill set's very different than Omar Norman Lott's skill set, and Joshua Joseph, would start, like, he is right behind James Pierce, but he would start on a lot of SEC rosters, and then you have Caleb Herring right there, and then you have a 5-star and Jordan Ross right behind him, and you know what I mean? Like, there was just guys on guys all across this defensive line, and they were elite stopping the run. That was just, you knew that was always going to be the case, but the sacks weren't there. I mean, this was, I think, in the definitely less sacks than they had a year ago, significantly. And I don't really have a great answer for that, but that was my big worry coming into this game was, yeah, Ohio State's offensive line's banged up, but my grievance is like, it kind of went under the radar because Rodney Garner is one of your best position coaches, and he's done a great job recruiting and developing talent. But Pierce didn't have the kind of year that we expected,
I'd fight back on. Well, that you expected because
that
you
I
had
expected for sure.
getting 25 sacks.
Well, hold on. I set the bar a little high before the year. I set the bar a little high.
To me, James Pierce. Look, I actually completely agree with your point. Of the pass rush just was not elite. I do think it was good. And I do think the sack numbers is a little misleading. And I think that's the point on Pierce. Pierce was still first in the SEC in quarterback pressures this season. He was still second, at least going into last night, in pass rush win rate. To me, he was still an elite pass rusher. He didn't get as many sacks, and some of that he missed some tackles. But to me, he's still impacted games a ton. And I do think that's the thing that I worry about most with this defense is losing him. There was not another elite pass rusher. And look,
well, you hope Herring or Ross takes that step. That's why you stack blue chippers, right? Yeah. Is that they should come in and replace him.
100%. And I mean, you could probably argue Omar Norman Lott's your second best pass rusher this year, and he's gone too. So I do worry about that. That's the one area on the defense that I point to, and I'm like, I do think that'll be worse next season. How much worse? I don't know. It might be a small drop off. But no, I agree with that. And grievance to the same point. Like last night, or we'll say first half last night. Why are they not playing Josh Josephs with James Pierce on the field some, even before third down? Like,
I feel like they did that a lot more early in the year and last year.
I don't think they did last year, but early in the year, yes. And obviously they did their third down package, but like Ohio State wasn't pretending to run the ball in the first half last night. Like, and Tennessee wasn't getting them in the third down.
Norman Lott didn't play many snaps last night.
No, he didn't. I don't know if he was banged up or what, but he played an abnormally small amount of snaps.
I agree with you that I'm kind of curious how the defensive line looks next year. You know what I'll say? The linebacker, Spillman looked good. I think Spillman's going to be fine. I think Thielander was fine tackling in space. Like, Thielander's skill set, he's good at. You know, like, Thielander is good at his things. I thought Arion was fine. Caleb Perry had a rough night in his snaps, and then the linebacker struggled, but safety too. Like, one of the middle of the field, it kind of speaks to what you're saying, the crossers and stuff, but like, they were put in a bad spot because the defensive line never got home. Like, Will Howard had all day to throw, so I like, yes, the linebackers and safeties had a rough night last night, but they had a rough night in part because the pass rush just never got home, like, at all. Yeah. Like, I mean, no sacks against Ohio State and Georgia with both lines being as banged up as they were. I would love to figure out why. I'd love to pick the brains of some capital B, capital K ball knowers to be like, what did Tennessee do defensively that caused this to happen? Because if you had told, I think either of us, if you had told us before the Georgia game that Tennessee would get 0 sacks in their first playoff game and really not pressure the quarterback at all against Georgia and their first playoff game, we'd be like, that doesn't seem likely. Tennessee will get theirs. They didn't. It's just really weird that Tennessee was not able, with as much talent as they've had on the defensive line. I just wonder if it's scheme. I wonder if it's by design. Like, I don't really have a great answer for that because the talent is there. When we talk about, like, everyone's so focused on the talent deficiency or disparity between Ohio State and Tennessee last night, where there really isn't, is on Tennessee's defensive line. Rodney Garner has acquired blue chippers. Like, this is a blue chip heavy defensive line that had a rough night twice in key moments at Georgia and at Ohio State. Like, it just, I don't know enough about what's going on there to be able to explain what happened, but that to me is one of the more baffling airing of grievances for me. It's just that, like, it's just so much talent, and to not produce in those two big moments in both games surprised me.
For sure. And it's like that was the path. That was the path all season. And we talked about it before both those games. To Tennessee being this year with the offense what it was, its path to winning these big games and beating the best teams was that its defensive line had to be really good. It had to take over games. And in a lot of ways they did that in the Alabama game. And that's why they were able to win the Alabama game. And they did not do that in either of the two games. And I mean, it's ironic that the third play of the game, or maybe it was the fourth play of the game, I don't know, first drive of the game, Bryson Easton just completely gets free and obviously grabs the face mask on a sack. But even, you leave that play, like, man, he got back there quick.
Yeah.
And from there, Tennessee's pass rush felt non-existent in that game, at least. And that's that's, I think, you're right. That's an airing of grievances. That's a very discouraging thing because it did feel like most places Tennessee still has a little bit of a talent gap against these best teams who are playing catch up. You felt like the defensive line, especially how well they played. I know it was bad teams, but just much they just dominated NC State, Oklahoma, those games early in this year. You felt like they had kind of arrived and they were going to maybe not dominate those games, but at least get theirs and play a whole lot better than they did in Athens and in Columbus.
Do you have any more grievances you want to air before we wrap up here tonight, Ryan?
I think I've let all mine rip. Yeah, it's
Hey,
this
has been a negative show, so let's just say, like, on the positive. I mean, that's kind of the nature of the grievances here. We're not airing that, like, well, that's just kind of the nature.
It's not Christmas. It's the Festivus episode.
Yeah, that's just what it is. Tennessee, the sky is not falling. Let's be clear. The sky is not falling. Tennessee is in a much better place than they were 4 years ago. They've won 30 games in the last 3 years. Like, things are good. But a lot of programs can get to good. And I think that's the thing. It's like, who do you want to be? Like, this is the hard part. Like, I'm not saying this first couple of years wasn't hard, but it's a lot harder to be great than it is to be good in this sport.
Yep.
And this is where things get tight. This is where the margins get thinner. Like, there are only a couple teams that can be the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Georgias. To get into that group, it's really, really hard. And now Tennessee is at that point where it's like, oh, you just saw it right in your face last night of like, okay, we got a ways to go. Like, we're good. It's nice that we're moving in this direction, but you're at a point where this is kind of a crossroads offseason where it's like, do you want to be elite? Do you want to be great? How much do you want to be tied to scheme? How much do you want to be tied to familiarity? Like, it's just, it's part of the deal now. I think if you want to be great and elite, this is a big offseason for Tennessee. And I think they can continue to be good if they don't go bold this offseason. But I think it's going to be hard for them to be elite and make that step if they don't make some bold offseason choices this year. Is that fair?
100% completely fair. And I think true. I mean, I agree with all that. And, I don't know how much, and not that you're saying that it does, I don't know how much of the stuff has to look bold on the outside. But there has to be in Josh Heupel's brain, in that noggin, he has to be thinking this is a serious problem, and we need to put all our resources into fixing it. Like, I wish there was truth serum, and I wish I could know how he really feels about it, because that would tell me a lot. Because it is a problem, and it's one of the main things keeping Tennessee from. And there's multiple things, but it's one of the things keeping Tennessee from getting to that next level. And you said it fantastic. Every step on the ladder gets harder and harder to take, and they get exponentially harder when you get here at the best, and you're trying to go from being a top 10 pro team, a top 10 program, to a top 5 program, and then 5-2 and 2-1. So it's all going to get harder. And there's multiple things, I think, besides just offensive scheme that are keeping them there. But for something that looked like such a major strength 2 years ago to now look like a major, major question mark. I won't go as far as saying weakness, but a major, major question mark. It's kind of jarring.
It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Vols. But, basketball's here. Basketball, number 1 in the country. Baseball, I think, has a chance to go. They definitely have a chance to repeat. It's hard, but they're going to be really good again. So, Vol fans will have other things to occupy their time, so you don't have to dwell on the CFP loss to Ohio State very long, because basketball's back tomorrow, and this hoops team can win a title. They make their first Final Four run, be a number 1 overall seed for the first time in school history. All that's in play. And then baseball will be here before you know it. Couple months, and baseball will be here, and we'll be sitting in the cold for a Tennessee-Georgia State game on that Tuesday before you know it, Ryan Schumpert.
Sounds glorious. 53 days away.
Is it all? Yeah, it's not far.
53 when you're listening to this. I think it's technically 54 for us. 12 days till SEC play gets rolling. Tip off Tennessee MTSU. This is a game. If Tennessee's not ready to roll, they'll be in a dogfight. MTSU is a good team, and this December 23rd game is the classic trap game in college basketball. When
is this their Tennessee Tech game for baseball? Is this the equivalent?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. MTSU's better than Tennessee Tech has been in baseball.
I don't know. Tennessee Tech's had Tennessee's number in baseball.
They've had Tennessee's number, but those teams haven't been good. I think that's more in the nature of baseball, just kind of being funny. And it is funny that it happened back-to-back years to Tennessee Tech in two very different spots, when Tennessee was flying as high as they possibly could be, and then when Tennessee was down very, very bad. But yeah, Tennessee needs to be ready to play against the Blue Raiders on Monday night, or they'll be in for a dogfight. So this team's been really mature to this point in the season. I'll be curious to see if they're locked in and ready to go.
Ryan Schumpert, always a pleasure. Go check out RockyTopInsider.com today. Bookmark it if you have not already. And we will talk again next week.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.